The desert stretched endlessly under the merciless sun, an ocean of heat and silence. Mirage waves danced on the horizon, twisting shapes that weren't really there. The air shimmered, the ground cracked, and every breath felt like swallowing fire. On that dusty training range stood a line of soldiers, rifles slung, boots buried ankle-deep in sand, faces half hidden under their helmets. Above them, a black flag snapped violently in the wind, the only sound breaking the stillness. The general's convoy had arrived an hour earlier, tires grinding through gravel and dust clouds. Everyone had straightened up, backs rigid, hearts beating a little faster. This wasn't a normal inspection. Rumor said General Marcus Harlan, known across the forces for his impossible challenges, had brought something new, something designed to expose weakness. He stood before them now, tall, broad, his uniform crisp despite the heat. His gray hair and lined face bore the weight of too many battles. His voice carried that sharp, cutting edge that made even the desert seem to listen. "Today," he said, scanning the line of soldiers, "I want to see what your finest shooters are made of. I've heard the word elite thrown around a lot here. Let's see if it means anything." He turned slightly, pointing toward the far horizon. A faint glint of light shimmered, barely visible, so distant that most could hardly make it out. "You see that speck out there?" he said. "That's a steel plate, 4,000 meters from where you stand. I want someone to hit it." A murmur ran through the ranks. 4,000 meters? That was beyond the reach of standard sniper training, beyond what even most elite marksmen attempted outside of simulations. The record books were full of near-mythical shots, most under 3.5 kilometers. 4,000 meters wasn't just distance. It was a battle with physics itself. The general smirked, folding his arms. "Any snipers here?" Silence. The question hung heavy, teasing, almost mocking. No one wanted to be the first to volunteer for what sounded like a setup for failure. Among the soldiers stood Sergeant Elise Warren, quiet, almost unnoticeable. Her brown hair was tucked beneath her cap, her eyes hidden behind dark lenses. She had been stationed at this base for 8 months and spoke little, her presence blending easily into the background. She wasn't the loud kind, nor the one who shared war stories over dinner. Most didn't know much about her, except for 2 things. She was steady under pressure, and her shooting scores were consistently top of the charts. But even she didn't step forward. Not yet. The general's grin widened. "Come on, don't tell me all your training, all your talk, all your elite units, and not one of you has the confidence to try." Finally, one soldier broke ranks. Corporal James Holt, tall, confident, the kind of shooter who lived for challenges. He stepped forward, smirked, and said, "Permission to demonstrate, sir." The general nodded. "By all means." The crew set up the Barrett rifle on its bipod, aligning it toward the distant target. The heat made it nearly impossible to see clearly through the scope. The spotter beside Holt adjusted his binoculars, struggling to even locate the shimmer of the metal plate. Holt steadied himself, breathing slow, finger curling around the trigger. Crack! The echo rolled like thunder across the desert. Seconds passed, too many. No sound, no spark. Just the wind, cruel and unforgiving. "Miss," the spotter called out. The general didn't move. He only said, "Next." One by one, they stepped forward, the base's best shooters, men and women trained for precision. Each one adjusted, recalculated, aimed. Each one failed. By the 5th attempt, sweat dripped into every eye. Hands trembled not from fear, but from frustration. The target was a ghost in the haze, a taunting mirage that refused to yield. By the 9th, tension replaced bravado. Even the wind seemed to laugh, shifting unpredictably every few seconds, making calculations meaningless. And by the 11th, After yet another miss, silence fell. The general didn't need to say anything. His raised brow said it all. 4,000 meters, he muttered, half to himself, and still no one hits. He turned to leave, dust crunching under his boots. Then his voice, low but clear, echoed once more. Any other snipers? This time, the silence wasn't from fear. It was exhaustion, defeat. But from the back of the line came a quiet voice, soft, almost swallowed by the wind. Permission to try, sir. Heads turned. Some frowned, others chuckled. The voice had come from Elise Warren. The general squinted, surprised. You? She nodded once. Yes, sir. A murmur rippled through the line. A few soldiers exchanged amused glances. You serious? Someone whispered. After 11 misses? But Elise's expression didn't change. She walked forward calmly, boots crunching on the sand. The general watched her, curious now. She didn't carry arrogance. Just focus, the kind that made people instinctively step aside. She reached the firing platform and knelt beside the rifle. Her movements were careful, deliberate. She didn't grab it like a weapon. She handled it like a fragile instrument. She adjusted the bipod, realigned the scope, and then took a long, silent breath. The sun reflected in her lenses, hiding her eyes, but her stillness spoke louder than any expression. You get one shot, the general said flatly. She nodded. That's all I need. A few soldiers snorted quietly behind her. But the general didn't stop her. Something in her calm unnerved him. Elise lifted her hand slightly, feeling the direction of the wind. The sand brushed against her fingers, tiny grains whispering their secrets. She closed her eyes, listening. The desert wasn't silent. It had rhythm, a slow breathing pattern, gusts rising and falling like waves. Her mind calculated wind drift, humidity, bullet drop, Coriolis effect. Every tiny element that could shift the path of a bullet over 4,000 meters. Numbers and memories flickered in her thoughts. The sound of her father's voice during childhood shooting lessons. The wind doesn't fight you, Elise. It speaks to you. You just have to listen. She adjusted the scope one last time and lay flat. The world shrank to the space between her eye and the target. Nothing else existed. The general folded his arms, smirking. Whenever you're ready. Elise didn't answer. She was already breathing with the wind. Seconds stretched. The heat pressed down. Sweat rolled from her temple to the rifle stock. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, heartbeat slowing to match her breath. Then crack. The rifle thundered, echoing through the desert. The sound rippled, then faded into an eerie stillness. Every eye turned toward the horizon. 10 seconds, 15, no sound. Just when disbelief began to settle again, a faint metallic ping carried across the dunes. The spotter froze, eyes wide. Hit, he whispered. Then louder. Hit. Direct center. No one moved. The general's jaw tightened. He turned toward her, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but awe. Elise slowly stood, dusting her uniform, calm as if nothing unusual had happened. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply said, wind shifted at 8 seconds. I corrected before the trigger broke. The general's voice was quiet now. You adjusted? Before it shifted? Yes, sir. He stared at her, the desert reflected in his glasses, his pride cracked like the sand beneath their boots. The soldiers behind them erupted into disbelief and scattered applause. But Elise walked past them silently, the rifle resting easily in her hands. She wasn't thinking about the distance or the record. She was thinking of the one shot she missed years ago, the one that still echoed louder than applause. And though the base would remember her as the woman who hit the impossible shot, Elise Warren knew something no one else did, that sometimes silence spoke louder than glory. She vanished into the tense shadow as the sun began to set, leaving behind only the fading echo of that single perfect shot. The morning had started with laughter. No one expected the general's sniper test to be anything more than a training exercise. But now, with the air thick and unmoving, the laughter had long died out. The steel target shimmered on the horizon like a mirage, mocking them all. The first shooter, Corporal Holt, had stepped up with confidence. He was the kind who thrived on challenge, broad shoulders, smirk on his lips, and the swagger of a man who believed the impossible was just another Tuesday. His spotter crouched beside him, binoculars raised, scanning for the barely visible glint 4 kilometers away. "Target in sight," the spotter murmured. Holt adjusted his rifle, exhaled slowly, and fired. The sound echoed across the dunes, followed by a silence so long it felt like time itself was holding its breath. Then, the spotter's voice broke it. "Miss," low and left by 2 meters. No one spoke. Holt clenched his jaw, muttered something under his breath, and set his rifle down. He knew that kind of distance was unforgiving. Even the smallest misjudgment in wind could send the bullet miles off course. "Next," the general called out, his tone unreadable. One after another, the snipers took their turn. Sergeant Lino, calm and composed. Private Harris, shaking with determination. Lieutenant Vega, known for his flawless range scores. Each of them approached the rifle like a gladiator stepping into the arena. Each of them left with defeat in their eyes. The wind shifted constantly, turning calm 1 second and fierce the next. Mirage distortion blurred vision through the scope. The target seemed to move like a ghost, always there, but never reachable. By the 5th shooter, sweat was dripping freely down every face. The heat made the rifle barrels too hot to touch. The spotter kept drinking from his canteen, voice growing hoarse from calling out "miss" over and over. The general's face was stone. His dark glasses hid his eyes, but the tension in his jaw told everyone he was losing patience. He wasn't a cruel man, just a soldier who'd seen too much to believe in excuses. 4,000 meters, he muttered, half to himself. The bullet drops like a meteor after 3. You're not fighting the enemy anymore. You're fighting the earth. The 6th shooter knelt, adjusted for wind drift, and fired. Another miss. The 7th tried to correct. Miss again. By the time the 9th stood up, a visible nervousness spread among the ranks. The general's silence had become heavier than his words. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made your heartbeat sound too loud. When the 10th fired, the general didn't even look toward the horizon anymore. He knew what would follow. Another long pause, another call-out, miss. And when the 11th shot cracked through the air, something inside the group shifted. The bullet cut through the desert like a scream that went on too long, too empty. 10 seconds passed. No hit. The spotter shook his head, lowering the binoculars. Nothing, sir. Not even a graze. That was it. 11 attempts. 11 failures. The general sighed, dusting sand from his uniform. I thought this base had the best. Guess I was wrong. He turned, preparing to leave, but the disappointment in the air was almost tangible. The soldiers avoided each other's eyes. No one wanted to be remembered as part of the team that failed in front of General Harlan. And then, a quiet voice came from the back. Permission to try, sir. The general stopped mid-step. The voice was calm, firm, and almost delicate, like someone stating a fact, not asking for permission. He turned and saw her, Sergeant Elise Warren, standing perfectly straight, hands behind her back, gaze unwavering. A murmur rippled through the line. Some men frowned. Others smiled awkwardly. The general squinted. You want to try? Yes, sir, Elise said simply. He studied her for a long moment. You think you can do what 11 of your brothers and sisters in arms couldn't? Elise didn't flinch. I don't think, sir. I'll just find out. A few soldiers chuckled quietly behind her. The laughter wasn't cruel, just tired, the way people laugh when they've already accepted failure. Fine, said the general finally. One shot. Elise walked forward. The sand crunched under her boots, the heat pressing against her back like a weight. She moved with quiet precision, as if each step had purpose. She wasn't tall or intimidating, but something about her steadiness drew the general's attention. She kneeled beside the rifle. It was still hot from the last shooter's attempt. She ran her fingers along the scope, the barrel, the trigger, familiar motions from 1,000 hours of training. But this was different. This wasn't practice. The general crossed his arms. You've got 10 seconds, Sergeant. Let's see what you've got. Elise didn't answer. She was already calculating. She took off her cap, letting the desert wind hit her face. The air smelled of metal, dust, and tension. She squinted at the horizon, the target a flicker of light nearly swallowed by heat waves. Her fingers adjusted the scope. 40 clicks up, 2 right. She could feel the wind's rhythm, 3 seconds strong, 1 second weak. The mirage danced, distorting her sight, but she ignored it. She knew better than to trust her eyes alone. To her, shooting wasn't about seeing. It was about understanding, feeling the world breathe, waiting for the moment it paused between gusts. She loaded a single round. The metallic clack of the bolt closing sounded louder than thunder. The general watched her. For a moment, he felt a strange sense of anticipation. Not hope, not skepticism, just curiosity. There was something different about the way she moved, the stillness that surrounded her. Behind her, the others whispered quietly. She's gonna miss. No one can hit that. 4,000 meters? It's impossible. Elise ignored every voice. She pressed her cheek against the rifle stock, adjusted her breathing until her pulse slowed to nothing. Then she whispered, barely audible, wind steady. Now. The trigger broke. Crack. The shot rolled through the desert like thunder splitting the earth. For a full 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then a faint metallic ping echoed back across the dunes. The spotter's hands trembled. Hit, hit. Dead center. Gasps filled the air. The soldiers froze. The general's expression didn't change, but the muscle in his jaw flexed once. Slowly, he took off his sunglasses, his sharp blue eyes narrowing at the woman lying in the sand. She didn't move, didn't cheer, didn't smile. She only whispered, wind shifted mid-flight, adjusted early. The general stepped closer, his voice softer now. You adjusted before it shifted? Elise nodded once. Felt it. The general looked at her for a long time, the edges of disbelief softening into respect. You felt it, he repeated. Behind them, the soldiers were still whispering, stunned by what they'd seen. It wasn't just that she'd hit the impossible shot. It was how calm she'd been, how effortless it looked. Elise stood slowly, brushing sand from her knees. The general extended his hand, but she didn't notice. She was already looking at the rifle again, the way an artist studies their brush after finishing a painting. For her, it wasn't triumph. It was confirmation. Years of silence, training, and doubt had led to this single moment. When she finally turned to face the others, her voice was quiet but steady. Sir, the test isn't impossible. It's just misunderstood. The general stared at her, eyes narrowing again, not in anger, but fascination. And in that moment, every soldier on that field knew something unspoken. They had just witnessed something rare, not just skill, but mastery. Elise Warren, the silent sniper, had done what none of them could. The general exhaled slowly, the ghost of a smile crossing his weathered face. "Sergeant," he said, voice steady, "that wasn't luck. That was art." But Elise had already turned away, the desert wind pulling at her uniform. "No, sir," she said softly, "just math and patience." As the sun dipped low over the dunes, the echo of her single shot still hung in the air, a reminder that sometimes the quietest soldier carried the loudest victory. The desert wind died down after the shot, as if even nature was stunned. Dust swirled lazily around the rifle stand. The smell of gunpowder lingered like a ghost of thunder. Everyone had seen the impossible happen, yet no one spoke first. It was Sergeant Elise Warren who finally broke the stillness by doing nothing at all. She simply unloaded her rifle, checked the chamber, and set the weapon down with ritual care. The general still stood there, unmoving. His voice, when it came, was low. "Confirmed the hit." The spotter raised his binoculars again. "Confirmed, sir. Dead center impact." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some clapped awkwardly. Others just stared. 11 trained marksmen had failed, and then a quiet woman no one had noticed before had walked in and rewritten what they thought was possible. Elise turned to leave, but the general's words stopped her. "Sergeant Warren, report to my tent at 1600. She saluted and walked off, her boots sinking softly into the sand. Inside the mess hall, the air buzzed with disbelief. Soldiers leaned over tables, replaying the shot as though it were legend already. She must have used luck. No, she calculated something we missed. She's been training secretly, I swear. Elise entered quietly, grabbed a bottle of water, and sat alone at the end table. The noise dimmed around her. Everyone wanted to ask how she did it, but no one dared. There was something untouchable about her calm. In her mind, the world hadn't changed. The target had fallen, yes, but the old failure still whispered louder than celebration. A memory she couldn't silence. Afghanistan, 3 years earlier. A rooftop. A friend beside her, Corporal Mason, read steady, grinning even under fire. "You always overthink, Warren. Trust your instinct." She'd aimed that day, wind in her ears, dust in her eyes. The shot went wide. Mason didn't make it back. And though no one blamed her, she had never forgiven herself. Now the applause echoing in the mess hall felt like mockery. Redemption didn't erase ghosts. It only quieted them for a while. At 1600, she stood outside the general's tent. The flap fluttered in the heat. "Enter," his voice called. General Harlan sat behind a folding table stacked with reports. He gestured for her to sit. "You surprised everyone out there, Sergeant." "Wasn't my intention, sir." "Maybe not. But you did." He leaned forward. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Elise hesitated. "My father taught me, sir. Before he passed, he said the wind tells its own story." The general studied her face, searching for arrogance and finding none. "Most shooters think in numbers. You think in rhythm." "It's quieter that way," she replied. He chuckled softly, then grew serious. "You know, the Army likes noise records, medals, interviews. They'll want your story." "I'd rather not, sir." "Why?" "Because it wasn't about proving anything. It was about finishing something." For a long moment, the general said nothing. Outside, the desert hummed with distant engines. Finally, he nodded. "You're dismissed, but Sergeant, good work." She saluted and left, leaving him staring at the door flap as if wondering who she really was. That evening, the sun bled across the dunes, turning everything gold and red. Elise sat near the shooting range again, her rifle cleaned and packed away. She watched the horizon, the same line of heat where the target had once shimmered. Footsteps approached. Corporal Holt, the first shooter of the day, stopped beside her. His tone carried no bitterness, just curiosity. I don't get it. We all took our best shots. What did we miss? She didn't look at him. You trusted the scope, she said. I trusted the wind. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Elise turned her head slightly. You were aiming at what you saw. I was aiming at where the world was going to be 10 seconds later. Holt scratched the back of his neck, half smiling. You make it sound like fortune-telling. Maybe it is, she murmured. Or maybe patience just looks like magic to people who rush. He laughed quietly and offered his hand. Well, magic or not, that was one hell of a shot. She shook it once firm. Thanks. When he left, she remained there until darkness crawled across the sand. Stars pierced the sky, sharp and cold. The desert at night reminded her of the rifle scope silent, endless, honest. 2 days later, a helicopter arrived from headquarters. Journalists stepped out with cameras, and the base commander looked uneasy. The general had kept the report discreet, but word had spread fast. 4,000-meter miracle, one headline read. Elise tried to stay out of sight, but eventually, a young reporter found her near the armory. Sergeant Warren, can we talk about the record? How does it feel to be the first in U.S. history? She cut him off gently. It wasn't a record. It was a test. But surely it proves. It proves distance doesn't matter if you misjudge the wind. He blinked, unsure whether that was philosophy or sarcasm. By the time he looked down at his notes, she was already walking away. That night, Elise dreamed of the rooftop again, the sound of the missed shot, Mason's body falling, the radio static crackling her name. She woke before dawn, heart racing. The desert outside was still dark, stars fading. She dressed, grabbed her rifle, and walked out to the range. The sand was cool under her boots. She lay prone, aimed at nothing, and listened to the wind. It whispered like a voice from the past, "You're forgiven." She wasn't sure if it was the wind or her imagination, but for the first time in years, she believed it. When the sun rose, painting the dunes in fire, she fired once more. No target, no spectators, just a bullet into the infinite. The recoil pushed against her shoulder like a heartbeat. It wasn't about hitting anything. It was about letting go. Later that morning, the general found her at the range again. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. Just needed the quiet. He nodded, standing beside her. You know, Command wants you to train the advanced sniper course. They think you can teach what happened that day. Elise smiled faintly. You can't teach listening, sir. You can only practice it. Then practice with them, he said. They need what you have. She looked back at the horizon, where yesterday's target glinted in the sun. All right, she said softly, but no records, no headlines. Deal. As he walked away, she called out, Sir? He turned. Thank you for letting me shoot. He gave a small, genuine smile. Thank you for reminding us why we still train. When he was gone, Elise picked up her pack and slung the rifle over her shoulder. The base was waking up, vehicles rumbling, soldiers shouting, the day beginning again. But she moved through it like a ghost, calm and steady. Everyone stared at her differently now. Respect mixed with curiosity, maybe even a little awe. Yet she still kept to herself. She wasn't chasing admiration. She was rebuilding quiet. She walked past the shooting field once more and paused. The steel plate still stood at the horizon, marked by a small, perfect dent dead in the center. It caught the sunlight and flashed, a single silent wink across 4,000 meters. Elise smiled for the first time in years. Not pride, not relief, just understanding. She whispered to herself, Mason would have laughed at that. Then she turned toward the barracks, the wind curling around her like an old friend. Behind her, the desert remained silent, but within that silence lived the echo of one bullet that had traveled farther than anyone believed possible. and the story of the woman no one expected, who finally found peace in the space between trigger and wind. The days after the shot were strange ones at the base. It wasn't the kind of fame anyone prepared for, not in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by heat, dust, and the echo of gunfire. Every morning began with reporters at the gate and ended with another command order, reminding the troops to keep operational discretion. But the story had already escaped them. Every channel, every blog, every military magazine had the same headline: the 4,000-meter shot, the woman who defied the impossible. For Sergeant Elise Warren, it was like watching someone else's life unfold. She saw her name in print and didn't recognize it. She'd never cared about recognition. The rifle had never been about glory. It was a burden, a promise she'd made long before this desert and long before the general's question. But the world didn't see that. To them, she was a hero. At dawn, she stood by the range again, hands wrapped around a steaming tin mug. The desert was quiet, the air soft before the heat would rise. The wind carried faint radio chatter from the command tent. "Sergeant Warren," came a voice from behind. It was Corporal Holt again, his face more relaxed now, maybe even respectful. "Command says you're flying to D.C. next week. They're giving you the Medal of Marksmanship or something." Elise didn't turn. "I didn't agree to that." He shrugged. "Doesn't look like they asked." She watched the horizon, the color of ash and gold. "That's the problem," she said softly. "They think this is a story." It was just a correction. Holt tilted his head. "A correction?" She set her mug down. "A long time ago, I missed a shot I should have made. This one balanced it." He didn't press further. Soldiers learned not to pry into ghosts. Later that day, the general called her in. He was already standing when she arrived, arms crossed, the lines in his face deeper than usual. "You've been officially commended," he said. "Orders came from the top. You're flying out tomorrow for an interview with the Defense Secretary. After that, you'll visit Arlington for a press event." Elise stood silent. "You've done something extraordinary, Sergeant," he added, perhaps sensing her resistance. "They want to show the country what excellence looks like." Her eyes were steady. "Excellence doesn't need a camera, sir." The general sighed. "You think I don't agree? But the uniform you wear, it's bigger than you or me. When the army succeeds, the country sees it. You represent that now." She nodded slowly. "Permission to speak freely?" "Granted." She met his eyes. "All my life, I've been told silence is weakness. That you have to talk, lead, explain. But that shot, it only worked because I didn't listen to noise. I listened to stillness. If they turn that into headlines and lights, they'll kill what made it real." The general leaned on his desk, his voice lowering. "Then don't let them. Go, stand there, say what you need to say, or say nothing at all. But you show them that stillness." For a moment, the soldier and the officer simply looked at each other, both knowing neither would win this argument completely. Finally, she saluted. "Understood, sir." That night, the base held a small send-off gathering, nothing official, just a few soldiers who wanted to wish her well. A radio played faint music. Someone had managed to find a bottle of bourbon. Elise sat on a crate near the fire, the flames painting her face in orange flickers. Holt, Reyes, and two others laughed nearby, trading jokes about reporters and Hollywood snipers. She smiled faintly, but stayed quiet. Her eyes were on the stars, endless pinpricks above a horizon that had become her only constant. Reyes leaned over. "You know, they're calling you the ghost shooter online. Sounds like a movie title." "Then let's hope no one writes it," she said. They laughed, but she meant it. Inside her chest, she felt the old ache, that unshakable guilt that even 4,000 meters couldn't erase. Mason's voice still drifted in her head, teasing her for being so serious. "Lighten up, Warren," he'd said once, back when the world was simpler. She closed her eyes and whispered to the fire, "I'm trying." The flight to Washington was long and quiet. From her window seat, she watched the desert fade into patchwork farmland, and city lights like rivers of gold. When the plane landed, there were already cameras waiting. A man in a suit, an assistant to someone important, handed her a schedule. Press briefing at 1000, meeting with the secretary at 1100, medal ceremony at noon. Elise just nodded. The rhythm of orders was familiar, even if everything else wasn't. Inside the Pentagon briefing room, the walls were white, the air cold, the lights far too bright. A row of microphones pointed toward her like rifles. The first reporter spoke. "Sergeant Warren, how did you manage such precision at that distance?" She looked at him, calm and measured. "By missing enough times before to know when not to rush." A murmur rippled through the room. Another asked, "Do you see yourself as an inspiration for women in the armed forces?" Elise paused. "I see myself as a soldier who listens." They expected bravado, technical breakdowns, maybe emotion. Instead, they got quiet. And for a moment, the silence in that sterile room was deeper than applause. After the ceremony, she stood on the steps outside, the medal heavy around her neck. She could feel the cameras still watching. A woman approached, civilian clothes, mid-30s, carrying a folded flag. "Sergeant Warren?" she asked. "Yes," the woman smiled sadly. "My brother was Corporal Mason Red. He talked about you all the time." Elise's breath caught. "You're his sister?" She nodded. "He always said you had the steadiest aim he'd ever seen." Elise swallowed hard, the noise of the crowd fading around her. "I missed that day," she whispered. The woman shook her head. "He said everyone misses." What mattered to him was that you never stopped trying. They stood in silence, the city buzzing behind them, the wind lifting the edges of the flag she held. "I made the shot for him," Elise said finally. "I know," the woman replied, smiling through tears. "He'd be proud." When she turned and walked away, Elise stood there a long while, the medal suddenly feeling heavier, not from pride, but from understanding. That night, she sat alone in her hotel room, the city lights painting lines across the window. The noise outside was constant, cars, sirens, life. She missed the desert silence. She laid the medal on the table, next to her dog tags, and whispered, "For you, Mason." Then she opened the window, letting in the cool air, the hum of the world. Somewhere far away, a helicopter thudded through the sky. She watched it fade and smiled faintly. For the first time, the guilt didn't tighten her chest. It simply sat there, a memory, not a wound. When she returned to the base a week later, the soldiers greeted her with cheers. The general shook her hand. "They loved your answers," he said. She smiled. "They heard what they needed to." "And what did you need?" he asked. She looked past him to the range, to the horizon she knew so well. Just to quiet again. That evening, she walked to the edge of the training field and watched the sunset burn the dunes red. She laid down her rifle, feeling its weight settle in the sand. "Any snipers here?" she murmured, repeating the general's question that had started it all. Then she smiled, the kind that comes when a story finally feels complete. In the distance, the wind whispered softly, no answers, no applause. Just peace. And that was enough. Weeks passed after her return. The base that once felt small now seemed familiar again, almost like a heartbeat she could finally follow. The desert, once suffocating, had become a kind of home, predictable, open, honest. Elise Warren was no longer just the sniper who made the shot. Now, she was assigned to lead the advanced long-range marksmanship program, a quiet corner of the base where soldiers came to test their patience more than their skill. Most thought she'd refuse. The general had half expected it too. But when the orders came, Elise simply nodded and said, "If I can help them listen, I'll do it." On the first morning of training, 6 soldiers stood in a neat row, rifles slung over their shoulders, eyes sharp, eager, and anxious. Some had heard stories about her. Some had watched the video of her record shot that leaked online. They expected a legend, someone dramatic, not the calm, soft-spoken woman standing before them. She wore a simple cap, sleeves rolled, sand on her boots. "I'm Sergeant Warren," she said, her voice even. "Out here, we'll forget the noise. You'll learn the difference between pulling a trigger and understanding a rifle." A few exchanged puzzled glances. She continued, "You'll miss. A lot, that's part of it. What matters isn't the miss. It's what the wind tells you afterward." One soldier raised his hand. "Ma'am, how far are we shooting today?" She pointed toward the horizon. "You'll find out when you stop asking." A murmur of confusion passed through them. Elise just smiled. "Set up your stations." Hours passed. The desert sun climbed mercilessly. The first shots rang out, echoing across the dunes. The soldiers checked scopes, recalculated, muttered curses under their breath. Elise walked among them silently, watching each movement. She noticed the tremor in one soldier's hands, the impatience in another's eyes, the overconfidence in a third stance. Finally, she spoke. "Stop firing." The rifles lowered. "Close your eyes," she ordered. The soldiers hesitated, unsure. "Do it." They obeyed. "Now listen." At first, there was nothing, just the rustle of wind, a faint hum of distant engines. "What do you hear?" she asked. "Wind," one muttered. "What else?" "Sand," said another. "Your heartbeat," she added. "That's the one you ignore. Every shot begins with that rhythm. If you can't hear your own calm, you'll never hit what's beyond a mile." The silence stretched. Then she said quietly, "Now open your eyes and aim like the world is breathing with you, not against you." When the next shots came, they were slower, steadier. None perfect, but truer. Later that afternoon, Corporal Dean, one of the younger trainees, approached her. "Sergeant, is it true you made the 4,000-meter shot on your first try?" She shook her head. 11th. He blinked. "You mean you missed 10 times?" "Everyone misses 10 times," she said. "Some just stop counting after 3. He chuckled awkwardly. "So, what made the 11th different?" She thought for a long moment, then replied, "I stopped trying to be perfect." He didn't understand it fully then, but years later, he would. That evening, Elise stayed behind on the range. The others had gone back to barracks, exhausted. She lay on the ground, the desert cooling under the stars. She aimed at the horizon, though there was no target. The silence wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. In the wind, she thought she heard Mason's voice again, playful, teasing, forgiving. "You finally figured it out, Warren." She smiled faintly. "Took me long enough." The next few weeks transformed the program. Word spread across the base about Warren's way. As soldiers called it, an unorthodox training method that taught patience before precision. Instead of hours of ballistic data, she made them meditate with their rifles beside them. Instead of endless drills, she told them to listen to the wind before taking a single shot. Many thought it strange at first. But then, they started hitting targets they'd once thought impossible. Even the general came to observe one day. He stood behind Elise as she instructed her team. "Your breathing is the bullet," she told them. "Control that, and the rifle will follow." The general leaned closer to her. "You've changed the tone of this place," he said quietly. "You're turning shooters into philosophers." She smirked. "Sometimes philosophy saves bullets." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You know, I once thought you were just lucky." "No one gets lucky at 4,000 meters, sir," she replied. "Not even once." By the third month, one trainee, Dean, had improved dramatically. He could hit a moving target at nearly 2,800 meters, a feat even veterans admired. But his real growth wasn't in accuracy. It was in stillness. He no longer rushed. He breathed between the gusts, waited for the wind's pause, and fired with intent, not hope. After a particularly good session, he approached her again. "You were right," he said, grinning. "It's not about hitting fast. It's about hearing when the world wants to be hit." She nodded approvingly. "Now you're listening." He hesitated. "But can I ask something? Why do you never talk about that day? The shot, I mean." Elise's expression softened. "Because the world already talks enough about it. I'd rather talk about what came after." "What came after?" She looked out at the horizon, her eyes reflecting the orange dusk. "Peace," she said simply. "And peace doesn't make good headlines." That night, as the camp quieted, Elise walked past the barracks and toward the dunes. The moonlight carved silver paths across the sand. She carried her rifle, though she hadn't fired it in days. At the edge of the field, she stopped and set the weapon down. The stars stretched endlessly above her, the same sky that had watched her failures, her redemption, and now her teaching. She whispered, almost to herself, "Mason, I'm still listening." The wind stirred, soft and cool, rushing against her cheek like an answer. For the first time, she didn't feel haunted. The guilt that once defined her now felt like a shadow she could finally walk beside. A week later, a letter arrived for her from the Pentagon. A formal commendation, another medal nomination, and an invitation to speak at the U.S. Army Academy. She folded the letter neatly and tucked it away. When the general asked what she planned to do, she said, "I'll go, but I won't give them a speech." He raised an eyebrow. "Then what will you give them?" She smiled faintly. A moment of silence. And that was exactly what she did. When she stood before hundreds of cadets in the Academy Hall, the cameras and lights ready, she said only this: "Precision is not perfection. It's understanding. The world moves, the air changes, the wind shifts, but silence remains. Listen to it. It'll teach you everything." Then she stopped speaking. For 30 full seconds, the entire hall was silent. No coughs, no whispers, no movement. Just the sound of breath. When she finally stepped back, the applause that followed was thunderous, but Elise barely heard it. All she could feel was peace, the kind that doesn't come from victory, but from knowing she had passed on the one thing she had once fought to find herself: stillness. As she walked off the stage, one young cadet saluted sharply and whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." Elise smiled. "Don't thank me," she said softly. "Thank the wind." The desert always changed with the seasons, though few ever noticed. The air grew colder, sharper. The dunes shifted their shape, and the horizon seemed to move closer one day, then disappear the next. Elise Warren noticed every detail: the rhythm of the wind, the scent of the air before a storm, the silence before sunrise. She had been training new recruits for nearly a year now. Her program, once doubted, was now considered the most disciplined marksmanship course in the division. The general had even joked that her philosophy of stillness had spread faster than regulations could keep up. But today, the air felt different. As Elise stepped out of the barracks, she saw the convoy parked near the range. Soldiers were loading crates, securing rifles, checking equipment. Deployment orders. She recognized the faces: Dean, Race, Holt, and the others she had trained with care and patience. Her students were going to war. "Morning, Sergeant." Dean greeted her with a grin, but there was tension behind his smile. "Morning," she said. "So it's official?" He nodded. "Command says it's a joint operation across the border. Just recon and overwatch." "Overwatch," she repeated softly. "That's what they said last time, too." Dean chuckled nervously. "We'll be fine, ma'am. You taught us well." She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the soldier, but the boy who had once asked her why silence mattered. "I didn't teach you to shoot," she said quietly. "I taught you to listen. Remember that." He nodded, not fully understanding, but trying to. The convoy left before dawn. Dust clouds rose behind the wheels, and Elise stood at the edge of the field watching them fade into the horizon. The silence that followed was heavy, too heavy. The general joined her a few minutes later, hands in his pockets. "You did good work with them," he said. "They're not ready," she replied. "They never are," he said simply. "None of us were." She glanced at him. "You ever get used to watching them go?" He smiled faintly. "No, but you learn to hope that what you taught them matters when it counts." She didn't respond. Her eyes were still fixed on the fading trail of dust. Days passed. The base felt emptier without the trainees' chatter, the echo of practice shots, the smell of gun oil in the air. Elise spent her hours maintaining rifles that no one would use for weeks. One evening, she sat alone in the range tower, writing in her notebook, fragments of thought, small lessons she hadn't yet shared. Wind speaks. Listen before it howls. Stillness is not silence. It's focus. Distance doesn't test the bullet. It tests patience. She stopped writing when the radio crackled to life. A voice came through, broken, urgent. "Command, this is Falcon Team. We're pinned down. Requesting overwatch." Elise froze. It was Dean's voice. She grabbed the headset. "Dean, it's Warren. What's your location?" "Static." Then, Sector 9. "Can't see the shooters." "Wind's shifting hard from the east." Her heart pounded. "Listen to it, Dean. Don't fight it. Let it guide the shot." A pause. Then his voice, steady now. "Copy that, Sergeant." The next few seconds stretched into forever. Then came the calm, measured tone of his spotter. "Target neutralized. Area secure." Elise closed her eyes, exhaling deeply. The radio went quiet again, replaced by the hum of static. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of Dean's voice, trembling under fire, haunted her. She knew the feeling too well, the uncertainty, the pull between instinct and fear. She walked outside, the night cold and clear. The stars above shimmered like they always did, distant, eternal, unconcerned. She whispered, "You watched over them, didn't you?" Whether she was speaking to Mason, the wind, or something else entirely, she wasn't sure. 3 days later, the convoy returned. Dust-caked vehicles rolled back through the gates. Some soldiers cheered, some limped, some carried silence in their eyes. Dean was the first to step out, weary but alive. He spotted her and saluted. "Mission successful, ma'am," he said. "We lost Reyes, though." Elise's chest tightened. She didn't speak, didn't know what to say. Dean looked down. He took a round trying to move position. "We couldn't pull him out until it was over." She nodded slowly. "Did he suffer?" Dean shook his head. "No, it was quick." They stood there in the wind, the sound of unloading gear filling the background. He kept saying something before. Dean hesitated. He said, "Tell her." The wind was right. Elise turned away, blinking hard. He listened, she whispered. That evening, the base held a quiet memorial. No speeches, no salutes. Just names, candles, and silence. Elise stood at the back, her hat over her chest. When it was her turn to place a candle, she knelt, lighting it carefully. The flame flickered in the wind, but didn't go out. She whispered, "You learned faster than I did, Rays." Afterward, she walked out to the edge of the range, the same spot where she'd once made the shot that changed everything. The dunes glowed faintly under the moonlight. She set down her rifle, looked out, and said softly, "If the wind remembers, maybe we don't have to." The next morning, the general found her sitting near the mess hall, a cup of coffee untouched beside her. "You did everything right," he said quietly. She shook her head. "There's no right when they don't all come back." He sighed. "You can't save them all, Warren. You can only prepare them." "I know," she said, "but it never feels like enough." He nodded slowly. "That's how you know you're the right one to teach them." They sat there in silence, watching the sunrise over the base. Weeks turned into months. More trainees came through her program, some as raw as she once was, others already hardened by battle. She trained them all with the same quiet patience. But something had changed in Elise. The old guilt had softened, replaced by something deeper, understanding. She no longer saw shooting as a test of skill, but as a conversation between the soldier and the wind, between chaos and control. One evening, Dean found her again. "Sergeant," he said, holding out a small box. "What's this?" He smiled. "Reyes family sent it. Said he would have wanted you to have it." Inside the box was a single bullet casing, polished, engraved with the words, "The wind was right." Elise traced the words with her thumb. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, she walked to the dunes one last time before her shift ended. She knelt in the sand, placed the casing gently at the base of a dune, and whispered, "You made your mark, Rays." The wind blew, scattering grains of sand across the spot, covering it slowly, not erasing it, but keeping it safe. She stood, eyes closed, and felt peace again, the kind that came not from silence, but from purpose. Back in her quarters, she took out her notebook and wrote one final line beneath all the lessons she had collected over the months. "When the wind remembers you, you never truly fade." She closed the book, set it aside, and looked out the window at the vast, moonlit desert. The world was still full of noise, wars, orders, medals, and headlines. But here, in the middle of nowhere, Elise Warren had found what so few soldiers ever did. Not victory, not fame, but peace, fragile, quiet, earned. The world had changed again. Technology moved faster than the wind Elise Warren once trusted with her life. Drones replaced scouts, computers calculated bullet trajectories, and new recruits learned to shoot with augmented displays rather than raw instinct. Elise watched it all from the sidelines, the once vital sniper program she'd built, now merging into something colder, more mechanical. Soldiers wore helmets that spoke in numbers, not intuition. They trusted signals, not silence. And yet, somehow, she was still here. The general had called her back to the main compound after months of isolation. She stood in his office, the desert sun spilling across the floor. His hair had gone gray, his voice softer. "Warren," he said, rising slowly from behind his desk, "you've been requested to lead a new project." She frowned. "Another training cycle?" He shook his head. "No, something different. They're calling it the Phantom Unit, a hybrid of old-world precision and modern tech. The command believes if anyone can balance the two, it's you." "Balance?" she repeated. "Between what, people and machines?" He smiled faintly. "Between instinct and instruction." Elise didn't answer right away. She stared at the photo on his desk. A younger version of herself beside Mason, both smiling after that first impossible shot years ago. The weight of memory pressed against her chest. Finally, she said, "All right, I'll do it." The training site was unlike anything she'd seen before. A sprawling facility in Nevada, surrounded by rocky terrain and silent valleys that stretched for miles. Her recruits, only 5 this time, were waiting when she arrived. They looked sharp, efficient, and unerringly confident. She studied them one by one. Private Larson, tall, analytical, his eyes flickering with the reflection of the digital scope attached to his rifle. Corporal Vega, former field recon, quick but impulsive. Lieutenant Crow, the youngest officer she'd ever trained, already too used to letting the machine decide for him. Sergeant Kim, a quiet observer, not unlike Elise herself once was. And then there was Captain Doyle, assigned as her second-in-command, but clearly here to report on her methods. Elise knew the type. He didn't trust anything that couldn't be measured in data. "Welcome to the Phantom Unit," Elise began, her voice steady. "You're not here to learn how to shoot. You already know that. You're here to learn how to feel the shot." Crow frowned. "Feel? Ma'am, we have sensors for that." Elise met his gaze. "And what happens when those sensors fail?" He hesitated. "They don't. They always do," she said simply, and walked away, letting silence hang heavy in the air. Training began at dawn. The recruits were given high-tech sniper systems linked to wind meters, rangefinders, and eye-assisted targeting programs. Elise let them rely on it for the first few days, watching quietly from the observation deck. They hit every target, perfect groups at 800, 1,000, even 1,500 meters. But something was missing. One morning, she had them assemble without their digital scopes. No sensors, no data, just rifles and the open desert. Vega looked uneasy. "We can't make accurate shots without readings." Elise smiled faintly. "You can't make predictable shots. Accuracy doesn't come from prediction. It comes from presence." The recruits exchanged uncertain glances, but obeyed. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice. "The desert talks. The sand moves. The air bends the bullet. Don't look for numbers. Look for the truth between them." For hours they struggled. Missed shots, frustration, arguments. Crow swore under his breath after each miss. By midday, the wind picked up. The range became almost unshootable. Elise stood behind Kim, watching her breathe, slow and deliberate. Kim squeezed the trigger. Crack. The target fell. The others stared in disbelief. "How did you—" Vega started. She stopped thinking, Elise said quietly, and started listening. Weeks turned into months. Under Elise's guidance, the Phantom Unit evolved into something rare, soldiers who could merge technology and instinct seamlessly. They learned to use their gear not as crutches, but as partners, to read data, then confirm it with their senses, to understand that sometimes the machines were wrong. Doyle observed everything, taking notes. He never interfered, but his silence carried weight. One night, he found Elise at the range, testing an old bolt-action rifle under the stars. "You really believe there's still value in this?" he asked, nodding at the weapon. Elise didn't look up. "The rifle doesn't care who holds it. Only the one behind it matters." He smirked. "That's poetic. But the future doesn't wait for poetry." She lowered the rifle, finally meeting his eyes. "The future doesn't exist without it." Doyle didn't respond. But the next morning, he joined the trainees for the first time. No tech, no sensors, just sand and silence. Months later, the Phantom Unit was deployed for its first live operation, deep reconnaissance in a hostile mountain region where signals were unreliable. The command expected Elise's team to rely on technology to maintain communication. They didn't. When the storm hit, their systems crashed. Wind speeds reached impossible levels. Drones failed. Command lost contact for 2 days. When they finally reconnected, they found Elise's team alive, every objective completed. The general called her that evening. "How did you do it?" Elise smiled. The wind remembered. News of the operation spread through the ranks. Soldiers began quoting her lines like mantras. "Listen before it howls. Stillness isn't silence." The military tried to brand her method, turn it into a doctrine. She resisted. "This isn't a system," she told them. "It's a discipline. You can't automate discipline." Still, they insisted. Her face appeared in training manuals, interviews, even recruitment ads. She hated it. The spotlight felt wrong. For her, this was never about fame. It was about keeping humanity inside the shot. One night, Kim approached her during their last week at the base. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I think I understand now." Elise raised an eyebrow. "Understand what?" "What you mean when you say the wind remembers. It's not about superstition. It's about respect." Elise smiled softly. "Exactly. We don't command the shot. We accompany it." Kim nodded, eyes thoughtful. "Then what happens when we're gone?" Elise looked toward the horizon, the night sky vast and endless. "Then the wind keeps teaching the next ones." As the Phantom unit prepared to disband, Doyle handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was an offer. Command of the division's new sniper program, fully digital. She read it silently, then tore it in half. "You're turning down a promotion?" Doyle asked, stunned. Elise nodded. "I'm not meant to lead machines. I'm meant to remind people how to be human." Her last day at the base was quiet. She walked the firing range alone, touching each station as though saying goodbye. The echo of past shots lingered in the air. Mason's laughter, Reyes' steady breathing, Dean's trembling hands. At the farthest end, she found Kim's. Target board, a clean hit through the center, marked with a single note taped beside it. The wind was right. Elise smiled. The words had come full circle. She shouldered her old rifle and turned toward the open dunes, her steps slow and certain. Somewhere out there, the wind shifted again, just enough to whisper through the sand. It carried no sound, only memory. And as Elise disappeared into that horizon, it felt as though the desert itself exhaled in gratitude. Years passed. Bases were renamed. New soldiers came and went, and the world spun faster than ever before. Technology now ruled the battlefield. Drones, algorithms, precision-guided rounds. Yet beneath all that noise, whispers of a legend still moved quietly through the ranks. They called her the listener. Some said she could read the wind like a language. Others claimed she once hit a target beyond 4,000 meters, a shot no machine could predict. Few had ever met her. Even fewer believed she was real. But to those who had stood beside her, Elise Warren wasn't a myth. She was memory, alive in every lesson they passed on, in every breath before a trigger pull, in every silence before the storm. It was 20 years since that impossible shot. The world was now different. Snipers were trained by AI simulators, guided by virtual mentors with perfect recall. Yet somewhere deep inside a small military academy in Colorado, a dusty notebook sat locked inside a steel cabinet. It had no official seal, no classified label, only 4 words written across its leather cover: "When the wind remembers." The young cadet who found it wasn't looking for legends. Her name was Ava Holt, granddaughter of Sergeant Holt, who had once trained under Elise herself. She had joined the academy out of curiosity, not destiny. But that notebook, it changed everything. Inside, there were sketches of wind directions, hand-drawn calculations, and fragments of thought written in careful script. Stillness is not silence. Every bullet carries a question. Respect the distance. It always answers. Ava read it all, wide-eyed. The simplicity drew her in, but the emotion behind the words struck deeper. These weren't instructions. They were confessions. One passage stood out more than the rest. If you wish to hit what no one else can see, first learn to listen to what no one else can hear. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind outside her dorm room rattled the window panes, whispering through the cracks like a voice trying to be remembered. The next day, she approached her instructor, an old man with gray hair and sharp eyes who had served decades before. His name tag read Capt. Dean R., though few knew what the R stood for. Ava placed the notebook on his desk. "Sir, have you ever heard of Elise Warren?" Dean froze mid-motion. Slowly, he set down his coffee and looked at her. "Where did you find this?" he asked softly. "In the archives," Ava said. "I think it's hers." He opened it, hands trembling slightly, eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. His lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "It's not just hers," he murmured. "It's history. Who was she?" Ava pressed. Dean looked out the window, the same wind blowing across the field beyond the academy. "She was the reason I'm still here, and the reason you even have this academy to train in." That evening, Dean took Ava to the range, the old one, long abandoned and half swallowed by weeds. The setting sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and gold. He pointed toward the distant ridge line. "That's 4,000 meters out," he said. "There was a day, long ago, when the general asked if any snipers were good enough to make that shot. 11 men tried. All missed. Then she stepped forward, silent as the wind, and made it." Ava's eyes widened. "You were there?" Dean nodded slowly. "I was. And I learned that day that accuracy isn't about sight. It's about belief." He handed her a rifle, an old bolt-action, carefully preserved. "This was hers," he said. "Try it." She hesitated. "Without sensors?" Dean smiled. She didn't have any either. Ava lay prone on the ground, aligning the crosshairs. The distance looked impossible, the wind unpredictable. Her heart raced. "Breathe," Dean said quietly. "Not like a soldier, like a listener." She inhaled. The air was dry, cold. She felt the faint tug of wind against her cheek, the subtle drift of sand at the edge of her vision. Then she squeezed the trigger. Crack! The sound echoed through the valley, followed by a silence so deep it seemed alive. When the distant target fell, Dean smiled, not because she hit it, but because she understood. Ava lowered the rifle, stunned. "That wasn't luck." "No," Dean said. "That was her, through you." Word of the shot spread quietly among the instructors. Soon, cadets began asking about the listener, the mysterious woman who once taught soldiers to trust their senses more than machines. Dean gathered them one evening and told the full story of Elise's early days, her impossible shot, the loss of Reyes, the creation of the Phantom Unit, and her eventual disappearance into the dunes. He ended with her final words to him, years ago, before she left for good. "Teach them how to hear again." The room fell silent. Some scoffed. Others stared at the floor, processing it all. But Ava, she felt something shift inside her. From that day, she carried the notebook everywhere. Months later, she graduated top of her class. The command offered her a position in the new long-range precision program. Digital, automated, efficient. But she declined. Instead, she requested assignment at a remote outpost, the same region where Elise Warren had once trained her team. Her instructors thought she was crazy. Dean just nodded and smiled. "You're going where the wind still speaks," he said. The outpost was silent, untouched by time. The dunes looked the same, the air dry and restless. Ava set up her station there, training a small group of recruits who volunteered to learn the old ways. She taught them everything she'd read, how to feel distance, read the world, trust silence. One of her trainees, a young soldier named Reyes Jr., once asked, "Mom, why do you always stop before we fire?" Ava smiled faintly. "Because the wind hasn't finished talking yet." Years later, another storm rolled across the desert, fierce, endless. The outpost lost communication. When it cleared days later, reconnaissance drones found the unit unharmed, every mission completed with perfect precision. When asked how they managed without data links or tech, Reese Jr. simply said, "We listened." Back at the academy, Dean, now retired, received a letter with a sand-stained envelope. Inside was a photo. Ava's team, standing in front of their old rifles, smiling beneath the endless desert sky. On the back of the photo, she'd written, "The wind was right. She's still here." Dean placed the photo beside Elise's old casing on his desk. For a moment, he could almost hear her voice again, calm, distant, carried by the breeze that moved through the open window. When the wind remembers, so do we. Years turned into decades. History books eventually mentioned Elise Warren in passing, as the sniper who made the impossible shot, the woman who defied calculation. But among those who still served, her name wasn't just history. It was a compass. A reminder that no matter how far technology advanced, no matter how loud the world became, there would always be room for the quiet ones, the listeners, the steady hands, the souls who waited for the perfect breath before the trigger. And when the wind whispered across the ranges of the American deserts, those who listened closely swore they could still hear it. Faint, eternal, unbroken. The wind was right.